Feast of Souls by Janson Davies. Chapter 1. The Ghost Ship. The stars beyond the galactic rim were quiet, too silent for comfort. Commander Rebecca Welsh stood at the helm of the Galahad, her gaze fixed on the holographic display that pulsed with a single anomalous signal. It was faint, erratic, and impossibly old. A distress beacon buried in the static of deep space, repeating the same message every 7.3 seconds. This is the Chelsea. Survey vessel. Crew status unknown. Requesting immediate assistance. Rebecca's jaw tightened. The Chelsea had vanished over a century ago, swallowed by the uncharted reaches of the Perseid expanse. No wreckage, no survivors, just silence. Until now. Confirm origin, she ordered. Lieutenant Carl Penn, her second-in-command, tapped through layers of data. Coordinates triangulated. It's coming from Sector 9 Gamma. Dead zone. No known traffic. No gravitational anomalies. But the signal's clean. Immaculate clean. Rebecca frowned. That ship should be dust. Carl nodded. And yet it's calling home. The bridge fell into a hush. Around them, the crew of the Galahad, 200 strong, felt the shift. A ghost had spoken, and ghosts didn't lie. Rebecca turned to her communications officer. Patch me through to Central Command. The officer hesitated. Ma'am, Command's response time is delayed. We're too far out. Of course. They were alone. She stared at the signal again. It pulsed like a heartbeat, like bait. Set course, she said. We answer. The Galahad turned toward the edge of known space, its engines humming with quiet resolve. As they approached the coordinates, the stars grew dimmer, as if reality itself recoiled from what lay ahead. Then they saw it. The Chelsea floated in the void, pristine and untouched. No scorch marks, no hull breaches. Its lights were on, its systems were active, and 30 crew members stood visible through the observation deck, alive, unmoving, staring out into the dark. Rebecca's breath caught. They haven't aged, Carl whispered. Not a day. The cruiser's scanners confirmed it. Vital signs normal. No sleep cycles. No caloric intake. No cellular degradation. It was as if time had stopped. Rebecca felt a chill crawl up her spine. Prepare an away team, she said, and get Dr. Thomas. I want answers. As the Galahad locked into position, the stars around them flickered, like candle flames in a dying wind. And somewhere deep within the Chelsea, something stirred. Something hungry. Chapter 2. The Ghost Ship. The Galahad drifted into synchronous orbit with the Chelsea, its hull casting long shadows across the survey vessel's untouched frame. No signs of damage, no evidence of drift. It was as if the ship had been placed there, deliberately, like a trophy on display. Commander Rebecca Welsh stood in the observation bay, arms folded, eyes locked on the ghost ship. 30 crew members were visible through the transparent bulkhead of the Chelsea's command deck. They stood motionless, facing outward, as if waiting for something. Or someone. They haven't moved, Carl said quietly beside her. Not since we arrived. Rebecca didn't respond. Her mind was already racing through protocols, contingency plans, and the gnawing sense that they were walking into something far stranger than any mission briefing could prepare them for. Dr. Mira Thomas, the cruiser's lead xenobiologist, entered the bay with a portable scanner slung over her shoulder. Vitals are stable, no signs of malnutrition, dehydration, or sleep deprivation. But their metabolic data is static. No circadian rhythm. No REM cycles. It's like their bodies are running, but their systems are on pause. Rebecca turned to her. Paused by what? Thomas hesitated. I don't know, but whatever it is, it's not biological. The away team assembled in the docking chamber. Carl, Thomas, 2 security officers, and a medic. They suited up, checked their gear, and prepared to board the Chelsea via tethered shuttle. Rebecca watched them go, her gut twisting with unease. As the shuttle detached and crossed the void, the stars around them seemed to dim. The space between the ships felt thicker, heavier, like moving through water instead of vacuum. Inside the Chelsea, the air was breathable. The lights were on, gravity was stable, but the silence was oppressive. Carl led the team through the main corridor, weapons drawn. The walls were pristine, no dust, no signs of wear. Personal quarters were untouched, beds made, belongings neatly arranged, as if the crew had simply stepped out for a moment. Then they reached the command deck. The 30 crew members turned in unison as the away team entered. Their movements were smooth, synchronized, unnatural. Their eyes were glassy, their expressions blank. Carl stepped forward. "This is Lieutenant Carl Penn of the Galahad. We received your distress signal. Can you tell us what happened?" The crew stared at him. Then one of them, a woman with a captain's insignia, spoke. "We were surveying the Perseid expanse. We encountered something." Her voice was calm, too calm. "What did you encounter?" Thomas asked. The woman blinked. "We don't remember." Another crew member stepped forward. "We woke up. The ship was here. We were here. We don't remember." Carl exchanged a glance with Thomas. "How long have you been like this?" The crew didn't answer. Instead, they turned back toward the stars, resuming their vigil. Back aboard the Galahad, Rebecca reviewed the away team's footage. She paused on the moment the survey crew turned in unison. Rewound it. Watched it again. It wasn't human. She tapped into the ship's diagnostic systems. The Chelsea's engines were functional. Life support was online, but propulsion systems registered 0 movement. The ship was frozen in space, not by mechanical failure, but by something external, something that held it in place. Then she noticed something else. The distress signal had changed. It was no longer repeating the original message. Now it pulsed with a new phrase. "Send more souls." Rebecca's blood ran cold. She activated the emergency beacon, but it didn't transmit. The Galahad was no longer moving, no longer transmitting, no longer alone. Chapter 3. The Frozen Hour. The air inside the Chelsea was sterile, but wrong. Lieutenant Carl Penn led the away team through the main corridor, boots echoing against metal that hadn't felt movement in over a century. The lights flickered in a rhythm that didn't match the ship's systems, like a pulse, slow and deliberate. Dr. Mira Thomas scanned the walls with her biosensor. No microbial decay, no dust, no signs of entropy. It's like this ship was sealed in a moment. Carl glanced at the survey crew, still standing in formation on the command deck. They're not reacting, not blinking, not human. The medic, Ensign Ravel, approached one of the crew, a young man with a nameplate reading J. Corin. His skin was warm, his pulse steady, but his pupils didn't respond to light. "They're alive," Ravel whispered, "but they're not here." In the ship's medbay, Thomas ran deeper scans. The results were impossible. No sleep cycles recorded in 112 years, no caloric intake, no waste production, no cellular aging. "They're metabolically active," she said, "but frozen. Like their bodies are being sustained by something external, something that doesn't obey biology." Carl frowned. Could it be stasis tech? Experimental cryo ? Thomas shook her head. "No tech can do this. Not without degrading the mind, but their neural patterns are intact, just dormant." She paused, staring at the data. "Or suppressed." Back on the Galahad, Commander Rebecca Welsh reviewed the telemetry. The Chelsea's engines were fully functional, fuel reserves untouched, but every attempt to move the ship failed. It was as if space itself refused to let it go. She ran a simulation. The engines fired. The ship should have moved. It didn't. Then she noticed something else. The ship's internal chronometers were frozen at the exact moment the distress signal was sent, 112 years ago. No time had passed aboard the Chelsea. Not a second. Rebecca leaned back, her mind racing. "Carl," she said over comms, "I want you to check the ship's AI core. See if anything's been tampered with." Carl and Thomas descended into the lower decks, where the AI core glowed behind reinforced glass. It was active, but its logs were corrupted. Every entry after the initial survey mission was blank. No errors, no shutdowns, just silence. Then Thomas found something buried in the subroutine, a neural signature. Not human. It was faint, like a whisper in the code. A presence that didn't belong. She stared at the waveform. It was rhythmic, intentional. "Carl," she said slowly, "this isn't a virus, it's a mind." Carl's hand went to his weapon. "You're saying something's alive in the system?" Thomas nodded. "And it's watching us." Suddenly, the lights dimmed. The temperature dropped, and every member of the survey crew turned their heads, slowly, in perfect unison, toward the investigation team. Carl raised his weapon. "Back to the shuttle, now!" But the corridor behind them was gone, replaced by a wall that hadn't been there before. Thomas's voice was barely a whisper. "It's changing the ship." Carl looked around, heart pounding. Time was no longer linear, space was no longer stable, and something ancient had awakened. Chapter 4. Gremlins in the Hull. The Galahad was no longer quiet. It hummed with something unnatural, low, resonant, like a vibration beneath the skin. Commander Rebecca Welsh stood in the Central Operations Hub, watching the ship's systems flicker with anomalies that defied explanation. "Report," she said, voice clipped. Her chief systems officer, Lieutenant Eric Sull, looked pale. "We're registering phantom movements. Crew logs show people entering restricted zones they were never assigned to. Surveillance footage confirms it, but the timestamps are wrong." Rebecca narrowed her eyes. "Wrong how?" "Some of them are dated before we arrived, others from over a century ago." In the lower decks, Ensign Lyra Dane woke up in a corridor she didn't remember entering. Her hands trembled. Her wrist chronometer was frozen, stuck at 3:17, the exact time the Galahad had locked into orbit with the Chelsea. She turned a corner and saw herself, standing at the far end of the hallway. Same uniform, same face, same terrified eyes. Then the figure blinked and vanished. Dr. Mira Thomas reviewed the away team's neural scans. Something was wrong. The team members who had boarded the Chelsea showed signs of temporal dissonance, brainwave patterns misaligned with their own biological clocks. It was as if their minds were slipping out of sync with reality. She ran a comparative analysis, then froze. The same dissonance was spreading through the Galahad. Crew members who hadn't left the ship were showing signs of memory fragmentation, lost hours, repeating dreams, hallucinations. Thomas activated a ship-wide alert. Rebecca convened a crisis meeting in the command chamber. The senior officers looked shaken. One of them, Commander Ryder, had aged visibly in the last hour. His hair had grayed, his skin sagged, but his medical records showed no change. "We're being pulled into something," Thomas said. "Not physically, psychologically, chronologically. The Chelsea isn't just frozen, it's a locus, a fixed point in space-time, and whatever's inside it, it's reaching out." Carl leaned forward. "You think it's sentient?" Thomas nodded. "And hungry?" The lights dimmed. The ship's artificial gravity fluctuated, just for a second, but enough to send pens floating and boots sliding. Then the distress signal changed again. More souls required. More time to feed. Rebecca stared at the message. It was no longer a broadcast. It was a conversation. In the crew quarters, Officer January Vey scribbled furiously in her journal. She didn't remember starting it. The pages were filled with symbols she didn't recognize, circular, recursive, like language trying to fold in on itself. She looked up and saw her reflection in the mirror. It was smiling. She wasn't. Rebecca stood alone in her quarters, staring out at the Chelsea. The ghost ship floated silently, its crew still watching, still waiting. She felt something stir in her mind, a memory she didn't own, a voice she'd never heard. You came to save them, but you brought me more. She gripped the edge of the console. The alien wasn't just aboard the Chelsea. It was inside her now. Chapter 5. The Hunger Awakens. Dr. Mira Thomas stared at the neural signature pulsing in the Chelsea's AI core. It wasn't code. It wasn't a virus. It was a rhythm, organic, recursive, and disturbingly familiar. She enhanced the waveform. It resembled a heartbeat, but not human. Carl Penn leaned over her shoulder. Is it alive? Thomas didn't answer immediately. She was watching the pattern shift, as if reacting to her attention. It's not just alive, she said finally. It's aware. Back aboard the Galahad, the ship's systems began to degrade. Crew members reported vivid dreams of places they'd never been, conversations with people they'd never met. Some woke up sobbing, unable to explain why. Others stared into space for hours, unresponsive. Commander Rebecca Welsh reviewed the logs. One entry chilled her. I saw my daughter last night. She died 5 years ago, but she was here. She said she missed me. She said she was waiting. The officer who wrote it had no daughter. Thomas convened a briefing with Rebecca and Carl. It's feeding, she said. Not on flesh, not on energy, on identity. Carl frowned. You mean memories? Thomas shook her head. Deeper. Souls. Whatever this entity is, it consumes the essence of a person, their past, their pain, their sense of self. It doesn't kill. It empties. Rebecca's voice was low. That's why the survey crew didn't age. Their bodies were preserved, their souls devoured. Thomas nodded. And now it's hungry again. The distress signal had been a lure. The Chelsea was the bait. The Galahad was the feast. In the lower decks, Carl discovered a hidden chamber aboard the Chelsea. It wasn't in the schematics. It pulsed with low light and strange symbols etched into the walls, circular, recursive, like the ones Officer Vey had drawn. In the center of the chamber was a containment pod. Inside floated a shape, amorphous, translucent, shifting between forms. Sometimes humanoid, sometimes insectoid, sometimes something else. Carl stepped closer. The pod flickered, and the alien opened its eyes. Back on the cruiser, Rebecca felt a sudden pressure in her chest. Not pain, recognition. A memory surfaced. Her first command, her first failure. The faces of the crew she'd lost, the guilt she buried. She gasped. The alien was inside her mind. Thomas activated a neural firewall, trying to isolate the entity's influence. But it was too late. The alien had seeded itself across both ships, through dreams, through memories, through grief. It didn't need bodies. It needed stories. Souls were just the medium. Rebecca stood in the command deck, watching the stars flicker. She understood now. The alien had waited a century, feeding slowly, savoring the 30 souls aboard the Chelsea. But it wanted more. It wanted complexity, emotion, regret. It wanted her. Chapter 6. The Trap Closes. The stars outside the Galahad flickered once, then stopped. Commander Rebecca Welsh stood in the command deck, staring at the navigation display. The cruiser's engines were active, thrust was engaged, but the ship wasn't moving. Status? She demanded. Lieutenant Eric Soul's voice was tight. Engines are firing, all systems nominal, but we're not going anywhere. It's like space itself won't let us leave. Rebecca's stomach turned. Same as the Chelsea. Carl's voice crackled over comms from the ghost ship. We're seeing the same thing here. The stars aren't shifting. We're locked. Thomas added, It's not mechanical. It's spatial. We've entered a fixed point, something artificial, something designed. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. A trap. In the crew quarters, Officer January Vey stared at her reflection. It no longer matched her movements. She raised her hand. The mirror version smiled and didn't move. She screamed. Across the ship, time began to fracture. Crew members reported missing hours. Some woke up in places they hadn't entered. Others found themselves repeating conversations they hadn't had yet. Surveillance footage showed people walking through walls, vanishing mid-step, or staring into empty corners for hours. One technician was found in the engine bay, whispering to a console that wasn't powered. It's inside. It's tasting us. Thomas's analysis confirmed the worst. The entity is no longer confined to the Chelsea. It's spread across both ships. It's feeding faster now, on confusion, on fear. It's accelerating. Carl's voice was grim. We're losing people, not physically, mentally. They're fading. Rebecca clenched her fists. How many? 27 so far. They're walking, breathing, but they're not themselves. In the medbay, Ensign Ravel examined a crew member who had collapsed mid-shift. His vitals were normal. His brain activity was flat. No dreams, no memories. Just a shell. Ravel whispered, He's gone. Rebecca stood before the observation window, watching the Chelsea. Its crew hadn't moved, not once. Still staring, still waiting. She understood now. The alien had waited over a century, feeding slowly on 30 souls. But it wanted more. It wanted complexity, emotion, regret. It wanted the richness of a full crew, 200 minds, each carrying pain, hope, and memory. It had sent the signal. It had baited the trap. And now it was feasting. She turned to Thomas. Can we stop it? Thomas hesitated. Maybe. If we can isolate its consciousness, sever its link to the neural field, but we need a host, someone strong enough to lure it in. Rebecca didn't blink. Prepare the disruptor. Chapter 7. The Soul Equation. The Galahad was no longer a ship. It was a trial. Dr. Mira Thomas stood in the neural diagnostics lab, surrounded by flickering displays. The data was undeniable. The alien's influence had spread across the crew like a virus made of memory. But it wasn't erasing, it was consuming. She turned to Commander Rebecca Welsh, her voice low. It's not just feeding on thoughts, it's feeding on meaning. Rebecca's brow furrowed. Explain. Thomas gestured to the scans. It targets emotional resonance, grief, guilt, longing. It doesn't want information. It wants story, identity. The soul isn't just energy, it's narrative, and it's devouring ours. Carl Penn reviewed the latest crew logs. 47 members now showed signs of dissociation. Some wandered the halls whispering to themselves. Others stared at blank walls, reliving moments that hadn't happened. One officer had drawn her childhood home on the floor of the mess hall, perfectly, down to the cracks in the foundation. She didn't remember doing it. Rebecca sat alone in her quarters, reviewing her own logs. Her voice sounded distant, detached. I remember the first time I lost someone under my command. I told myself it was the cost of duty. But I lied. I carry them with me. Every day. Every decision. She didn't remember recording it. She didn't remember crying. Thomas's theory solidified. The alien was a quantum parasite, existing in a state between dimensions. It didn't kill. It harvested. It preserved bodies as vessels, minds as meals. The survey crew had been its pantry, the Galahad was its banquet, and it was accelerating. Carl proposed a countermeasure, a neural feedback loop designed to isolate the alien's consciousness and sever its link to the crew. But it required a focal point, a host strong enough to lure the entity into a trap. Thomas hesitated. It has to be someone with emotional gravity, someone it's already feeding on. Rebecca stepped forward. It's me. She had felt it for days now, the pressure behind her eyes, the flicker of foreign thought. The alien had tasted her grief, her guilt, her buried memories. She was the richest soul aboard, and she would use that to bait the trap. Thomas prepared the disruptor, a compact neural device calibrated to emit a recursive signal designed to collapse the alien's waveform. It was risky. If Rebecca lost focus, she could be consumed entirely. Carl gripped her shoulder. You don't have to do this by yourself. Rebecca met his gaze. I already am. She boarded the Chelsea one final time, alone. The survey crew watched her enter, their eyes blank, their mouths slightly open, as if waiting to speak. She descended into the hidden chamber. The alien stirred. Its form shifted, light and shadow, memory and hunger. It spoke in the voices of the dead, of her past, of her pain. You carry so much. Let me help you forget. Chapter 8. The Commander's Past. The chamber inside the Chelsea pulsed with light that had no source. Rebecca Welsh stood alone, the neural disruptor strapped to her spine, its signal calibrated to her brain waves. Around her, the walls shimmered, not metal, not organic, but something in between, a membrane between realities. The alien stirred. It didn't speak in words, it spoke in memory. She was 12 again, standing in the rain outside her childhood home. Her father's voice echoed from inside, angry, broken. She remembered this night, the night she decided she would never be powerless again. But she hadn't remembered it in years. The alien had. She blinked, and the scene shifted. Now she was on her first command. The Aegis Dawn, a failed rescue mission. 27 crew lost to a spatial rupture. She had made the call. She had survived. She had buried their names. Now they stood before her, eyes hollow, mouths open. You left us. She gritted her teeth. I saved who I could. You saved yourself. The disruptor pulsed against her spine, syncing with her neural rhythms. It was working, drawing the alien deeper into her consciousness. But the cost was rising, her memories blurred, her sense of self frayed. She was no longer sure which thoughts were hers. The alien took shape, not as a monster, but as a mirror. It wore her face, it spoke in her voice. You are rich with pain. You carry so much. Let me take it. She stepped forward. You want my soul? Then take it. But you'll choke. The mirror, Rebecca smiled. I've tasted better. Rebecca activated the disruptor. The chamber screamed. Suddenly she was nowhere, a void, a silence, a place outside time. She floated in memory, fragments of her life, her choices, her regrets. The alien swam through them, feeding, feasting. But Rebecca held on. She focused on one memory, one anchor, her crew, the ones still alive, the ones she could still save. She whispered their names, one by one. The alien recoiled. It wasn't just pain that gave a soul flavor. It was love, it was duty, it was sacrifice. The disruptor reached full charge. Rebecca opened her eyes. The alien screamed, not in rage, but in hunger denied. Its form fractured, its grip loosened, and the chamber collapsed. She woke on the floor of the Chelsea, gasping. Carl was beside her. Thomas was calibrating the disruptor. You did it, Carl said. You drew it out. You weakened it. Rebecca sat up, eyes burning. It's not dead, she said, but it's wounded. Chapter 9. The Ritual of Severance. The Chelsea groaned as if waking from a century-long dream. The alien writhed, caught in the feedback loop. It tried to escape, to fracture reality again, but the field held. Carl rerouted emergency power. Thomas adjusted the frequency. The entity shrieked, its form unraveling. Then something unexpected happened. The survey crew began to move. They collapsed, aging rapidly, their bodies catching up to the century they had missed. Their souls, long devoured, began to return. One by one they whispered, "Thank you." The alien fractured, its consciousness splintered. And then, silence. Rebecca collapsed, her mind scorched but intact. Carl caught her. Thomas shut down the field. The chamber dimmed. The Chelsea began to drift. The Galahad regained propulsion. The trap had closed, and the souls had been freed. Chapter 10. Feast of Souls. The Chelsea began to disintegrate. Its hull groaned, fracturing along seams that hadn't existed moments before. The containment field had collapsed the alien's consciousness, but not its hunger. It was dying, and it was desperate. Commander Rebecca Welsh stood in the observation bay of the Galahad, watching the ghost ship unravel. The survey crew had aged in minutes, their bodies finally catching up to the century they'd been denied. Most had passed peacefully. Some had whispered final words, names, regrets, fragments of who they once were. But the alien wasn't finished. Dr. Mira Thomas's voice crackled over the comms. "We're detecting a surge in neural interference. It's trying to jump. It's looking for a new host." Carl Penn was already moving. "We need to shut down the neural grid, isolate the ship." Rebecca didn't move. She felt it. Inside her, the alien had tasted her soul, and it wanted more. It surged through her memories, clawing at the edges of her identity, her childhood, her command, her failures. It whispered in the voices of the dead. "You carry so much. Let me carry it for you." She staggered, gripping the console. Thomas's voice was urgent. "Rebecca, you need to sever the link. Now." But Rebecca understood something the others didn't. The alien wasn't just feeding. It was learning. She closed her eyes. She saw herself, standing on the deck of the Aegis Dawn, watching the rupture swallow her crew. She saw her father, broken and bitter. She saw every decision, every sacrifice. And she saw the alien, not as a monster, but as a mirror. It had no form, no voice. It was shaped by what it consumed. It was a reflection of pain, of guilt, of memory. It was her shadow. She whispered, "You want me? Then take it all." She opened her mind. The alien surged in and choked. Rebecca's soul was not just grief. It was love. It was duty. It was defiance. She flooded the entity with every moment of strength, every act of compassion, every memory of those she had saved. The alien writhed, unable to digest it. It fractured, it screamed, and it died. The Chelsea finally disintegrated into dust. The stars shifted. The Galahad moved. Rebecca collapsed, unconscious. Thomas and Carl reached her, scanning her vitals. She was alive. Her neural patterns were intact, but something had changed. She had faced the abyss and returned whole. Chapter 11. The Reckoning. The Galahad drifted free at last. Its engines hummed with quiet relief, no longer fighting against the invisible grip that had held it in place. The stars outside the viewport moved again, slow, deliberate, like the universe exhaling. But inside the ship, silence reigned. Not the silence of peace, the silence of reckoning. Commander Rebecca Welsh stood alone in the observation deck, watching the final fragments of the Chelsea dissolve into the void. The ghost ship had served its purpose. Its crew, preserved for over a century, had finally aged, died, and been released. Their souls, once devoured, had returned in a final surge of light and memory. She had felt it, a wave of presence, of gratitude, of closure, but also of cost. Dr. Mira Thomas reviewed the final scans. No residual neural signatures, no anomalies. The entity is gone. Carl Penn leaned against the console, his face drawn. We lost people, but we didn't lose ourselves. Rebecca didn't respond. She was staring at the stars, her reflection barely visible in the glass. She looked older, not physically, but in the way someone looks after surviving something that rewrites them. In the memorial chamber, names were etched into the wall. The 30 crew of the Chelsea finally laid to rest. The 27 lost aboard the Galahad, their minds consumed and never recovered. And one final name, Chelsea. Not just a ship, a warning. Rebecca recorded her final log. There are things in the galaxy that do not kill. They consume, they unravel, they feed on what makes us who we are. But we are more than memory, more than pain. We are the stories we choose to carry, and the ones we choose to let go. She paused. We answered a call that should never have reached us. We faced a hunger older than stars, and we endured. Later, in her quarters, Rebecca sat with a journal she hadn't opened in years. She wrote, not a report, not a log, but a letter. To the families of the lost, to the future commanders who might one day hear a signal that shouldn't exist. She wrote of grief, of duty, of the soul. The Galahad turned toward charted space. Behind them, the void was quiet once more. But Rebecca knew the truth. Some hungers never die. They wait. Epilogue. Legacy of souls. Years later, the Galahad would become legend, a ship that returned from the edge of time, a commander who faced the abyss and did not blink, and a story whispered across star systems. If you hear a signal from the far side of the galaxy, don't answer, unless you're ready to lose everything you are. The end. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you.